Hi there, Steve Kaufman here. Today I'm going to do the third in my series, which I call the Language Learning Tripod. The first one was to have the right attitude. That's key, and I went into some detail about the kind of attitude you need to have. The second was to spend enough time. But even if you spend enough time, and if you are motivated, you have to learn to notice. And I think that is what distinguishes not so successful language learners from successful language learners. We have to notice. Now, speaking of noticing, someone said, what is that map, on the back wall there? So I'll tell you, it's a map of La Nouvelle-France, or Canada, sometime in the 17th century. What do we have here? Carte du Canada ou de la Nouvelle-France. And it's par Guillaume de Lille, géographe de l'Académie royale des sciences à Amsterdam. Okay, there you have it. It shows, what is Quebec, the Great Lakes, parts of New England, somewhere in the 17th century. So, that's for the person who noticed the map. Noticing. All right, when we start a new language, everything is a blur. We don't notice much. The words seem to flow together. Everything is strange. How do we get to the point where we convert this into something that's meaningful for us? We obviously need to develop that capability in the brain to treat this as a language, much as the brain already treats our native language or other languages that we know as something that is converted easily into meaning. So, to me, I think this is going to be individual for different people, so I can only talk about what works for me. The most important thing that enables me to start noticing the language is simply lots of exposure. If I can guarantee myself that I listen a lot and read a lot, I will gradually start to notice more and more because the language just becomes more and more familiar to me. Now, people say, how can you listen to something you don't understand? Well, I've explained many times, I start with short things. I start with things where I either have a translation or I actually prefer to do it as we do it at Link, not surprisingly, and that is to look up the individual words. Personally, I find the translation or the bilingual text distracting, but other people love doing it that way. So, this is good, this is bad. It's a matter of what works for you individually. I like the idea that, it's much like at Link. When we start a new language, all the words are highlighted in blue. As I go through and pick out the words that I need to learn, they convert to yellow, and then I can get rid of all the other blue words in that text, convert them to white. And once a word is converted to yellow or white, whenever that word appears again, it'll be yellow or white. So then I can focus more and more on the words that I don't know. Once I have saved a word, then I can review it in flashcards. I don't do a lot of flashcarding, but when I do, I'm looking to train my brain to the relationships between words, the components that reappear in different words. And so very often when I do flashcards, I have the foreign word and the English translation and the phrase that we capture all on the front. I'm just looking at them. I'm going through quickly. I don't want to challenge my brain to try to remember it. Personally, I don't find that works for me. What works for me is exposure. So I review them quickly and try to see if I can train my brain to see the connections between different words. When I read at Link, because the words that I've previously saved are highlighted in yellow, I find that helps to remind me that I've looked it up. Of course, I can see the meaning. And so it's just this constant exposure. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, words that I couldn't remember, I see them in more and more different contexts. I start to notice them. Now, the more, language learning is a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. The more of the pieces you have in place, the more new things that used to just go flying by you that you didn't notice, now you start to notice. Now, another thing that helps you notice, obviously, is to read some description of the frequently occurring patterns in the language or a grammatical explanation. But I've also found that a grammatical explanation that I read at an early stage, it doesn't have much impact on me, but at a later stage, once I have already kind of seen that pattern, then if I read the grammatical explanation, it helps me notice it again. And words that I have tried to remember, I'll try to, or that I've worked in my flashcards on, or that I know that these are important words for me. When I hear them, then I try to make a mental note that I've heard them. I always like to listen to whatever I read and read whatever I listen to, because I find that reinforcing also helps me notice things. With regard to pronunciation, we have to be very careful not to allow our native language, and particularly the writing system in our native language, to influence what we hear. So if we are say a Spanish speaker, where the phonetic, the alphabet is very phonetical, and so every word always has the same sound in Spanish. So if we come to English and we see a word like word, W-O-R-D, word, bird, B-I-R-D, heard, H-E-A-R-D, we have to start noticing that it doesn't matter how those words are written. In fact, they're all pronounced the same. So we need that deliberate attempt to start noticing these kinds of things. And so you train yourself to notice. You get better the more you're into the language. And of course, the more languages you know, the easier it is to notice, because you are already familiar with similar patterns in other languages, particularly if there are related languages. So it's easier to notice how they might differ in the new language, or how they might be the same. So it's this old adage, the Sufist adage, I often mention this, you can only learn what you already know. But really what that means is, once you notice something, or maybe it's pointed out to you, then you have a better chance of noticing it the next time. And the more you notice things, the more likely it is to eventually stick. So to me, language learning is a matter of noticing, and frequently noticing, and that in this way, eventually things stick in the brain, much more so than deliberately trying to memorize something, which I have found not so effective. Mistakes. Here's another one. When you speak or write, when you are corrected, to me, if I am corrected or if I correct someone else, I don't expect that person that I corrected or the person who corrected me will enable me to get it right the next time. Correction is not about getting it right the next time. Correction is about making you start to notice. And so by pointing it out, but I'll still get it wrong the next time. But if it's pointed out again, and maybe I start to notice when I'm listening, slowly, there's a chance that my brain will start to pick up on this, because the brain is trying to create rules and establish patterns so that it can deal with this, new experience, which is the new language. So there are these things that you can do to help the brain. Let's see, I made some notes. I don't always make some notes here. Help the brain notice. All right. So there you have it. I mean, it's individual. It's the key learning skill, noticing, because you have to condition your brain to the new language. Once you have these words in you, that they're part of that system, then to actually develop the skill of speaking and writing and understanding is going to flow from that. Because if you've noticed all these things, and you've built up the vocabulary, and you've noticed these different structures, and you've noticed the pronunciation, so they become really a part of how you use the language. It's now starting to fall into place. Now, if you want to develop the skill to speak better, you have all the elements in place. So my advice is focus on deliberately noticing, be concerned about your ability to notice. Don't get upset if you read a grammar rule, and forget it. If you are corrected and make the same mistake again, if you study a list of words and can't remember them, if you're reading and the same places are still difficult to understand, none of that matters, because the sheer fact of doing those things is gradually and unmistakably going to enable your brain to start noticing these things. And your task is to expose the brain to enough stimulus, both in the form of the language and some of these other activities, that it starts to notice. And once it starts to notice, it'll build for you a whole control center for the new language. So just to summarize the three here, you've got to be positive about the language. You have to like the language. I think your emotional relationship to the language is extremely important to learning it. You've got to be confident about your own ability. You got to like the task. You don't want to get frustrated at yourself. All of these attitude factors are extremely important. The second thing was time. It takes time. The brain learns all the time, but the brain learns slowly. So if you are serious about learning the language, you have to put in the time. And put the time in enjoyably and efficiently in whatever activities you find enjoyable and efficient for you. And then the third issue was this developing the ability to notice, initially through just a lot of exposure, a lot of listening and reading and speaking, and then taking advantage of when a mistake is pointed out, or you're skimming through a grammar book, or you're flipping through some flashcards. Realize that these things are helping you to notice, and be a little bit deliberate in that you want to notice. When you're listening, oh yeah, there was that. Or when you're reading, like I'll often underline a phrase because I know I consistently get it wrong. And all of this is sending signals to your brain that's going to help your brain notice not only the details of the language, but put together sort of a comprehensive control center for the language. So there you have it. I think that language learning is essentially quite a simple concept. Those are the three elements: your attitude, the ability to enjoy, your commitment, your connection to the language, the time you put in, and then developing this ability to notice. So I look forward to any questions. Bye for now.